Atumba was a middle-aged man from the well-known village of Chibalashi. The people of this land were celebrated for their exceptional farming and hunting skills. The soil was so fertile that each year it produced an abundance of food, ensuring that nearly everyone was happy. However, Atumba was notoriously lazy. Throughout his life, he had never set foot on the farmland or joined the other men in their hunting for fresh meat. During his childhood, his mother indulged him with everything he desired. Whenever he expressed a desire to accompany his father to the farm, she would swiftly intervene, saying, "Oh no, dear son, you're my prince, the only son I am blessed with. You don't need to work. Your father and I will take care of the farm. All you need to do is rest, my son." This always infuriated Atumba's father. "You are spoiling this child," he would exclaim. "How will he grow into a real man if you treat him this way?" But each time, his wife would counter that he was a wicked man who didn't care for their son's well-being. As the years passed and seasons changed, Atumba grew into a man while his parents aged, losing the strength to farm every day. Despite their decline, Atumba felt no pressure to cultivate the land, believing that his parents had invested enough to sustain them for a long time. Once he reached middle age, Atumba informed his parents of his desire to marry, and they were pleased with his decision. However, this marked the beginning of new problems. "Mother," he said, "I would like you to give me some bags of crops that you and father have harvested so that I can take them to my in-laws for further marriage discussions." His father responded with disappointment. "You are now a grown man. You should be able to harvest the crops yourself. How will you take care of your wife if you can't even gather the food for her?" While his father expressed his frustration, Atumba's mother remained silent. The following day, she secretly snuck a few bags of their harvested crops, swapping them for other goods at the marketplace, so that her husband wouldn't find out, and gave them to Atumba. "Here, my son," she said, her eyes filled with affection. "Take these bags of crops and marry the woman you desire. I have promised to give you my best as long as I live." Her expression radiated the warmth of a devoted mother, as if she were the best mother in the world. Years passed, and Atumba and his wife Luwano had 3 children. Luwano was hardworking and had a passion for farming. However, Atumba's lack of ambition and his lazy habits held her back. Their household fell into disrepair. The roofs of their huts leaked and had not been mended, and there were times when the home was devoid of food, leaving their children crying from hunger. Yet Atumba remained indifferent. His wife carried the weight of the household, while he did little to help. As time went by, Atumba had deteriorated even further. He developed a habit of sitting under a bamboo tree outside his compound all day, sipping beer and munching on nuts, while he told the village young boys stories with a charming smile. He laughed and tossed the nuts, one after another, declaring, "Life is too short to be working. A man like me must enjoy his rest." Luwano, his wife, noticed that things had gotten out of hand. Though she typically remained silent, this time she confronted her husband. "My husband, what kind of a man are you who sits under a bamboo tree all day, telling stories to young boys? What example are you setting for them? We have no food in the house, and our children are starving. You're supposed to help find food." Her pain was noticeable. "He who is hungry must go out and look for food themselves. Our children can always eat at our neighbors' houses. After all, What belongs to my neighbor belongs to me too, Atumba replied, proudly, tossing a handful of nuts into his mouth. A mixture of emotions swirled within Luono. She felt deep sadness and sympathy for her husband, but it was the anger that ultimately prevailed. I will not cook for you, Atumba, not until you start providing for this family. Atumba laughed, mistaking her seriousness for a joke. You're my wife. I know you'll cook for me, he said, shoving his hand full of nuts into his mouth and rubbing his pot belly, declaring it made him look more responsible. Days passed and Luono continued to refuse Atumba food. Atumba was angered, his stomach rising and falling with each breath. Determined to prove he was still Atumba, he made plans to marry a second wife from another village, presenting himself as a responsible man. Her name was Mwansa, and Atumba proudly brought her home. When Atumba introduced Mwansa to Luono, Luono was taken aback. Shocked by the revelation, she felt a wave of pity for Mwansa. The poor woman probably had no idea what kind of man Atumba truly was. You're welcome, my dear, Luono said, pulling Atumba aside. My husband, where did you get the bag of crops and other goods to give this woman's family when we have no food in our house? However, Atumba sidestepped her question, quickly changing the subject. Many villagers echoed Luono's concerns, questioning Atumba's provisions for his new wife. One afternoon, Atumba's friend, Kofi, came to visit after hearing the news about Atumba's new wife. They sat under a bamboo tree where Atumba ate his meal cooked by his second wife. Atumba, I've been here for a while now, and you haven't invited me to join you for a meal, Kofi remarked. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. How can a man be wandering around the village on an empty stomach? When you return to your house, you will eat again. Do you think that's fair to me? Atumba replied, boastfully, loudly chewing the bones of his meat and rubbing his stomach as he twisted his legs while swallowing. It was clear from his response that Atumba had no intention of sharing his food with Kofi. Luono looked on, embarrassed for him, and couldn't fathom how he could respond so shamelessly. Kofi was speechless upon hearing his friend's response. But what could he have said? Attempting to change the subject, Kofi inquired, Atumba, I heard that you have married a new wife. Yes, I have, Atumba replied, proudly. And she is already with child, he continued, swallowing his food while nodding his head in reaction to the chili that spiced his meal. Atumba, Kofi exclaimed, shocked. How will you manage to take care of 2 wives and 4 children, with another one on the way? I advise you to start farming on your father's land, which you inherited. Whether I farm or not, or marry multiple wives, is it your business, Kofi? I suggest you leave my compound and focus on your own life. Atumba replied angrily, feeling the need to assert himself against Kofi. Kofi remained silent, disappointed in his friend Atumba, and eventually left. Months passed and the seasons changed. Atumba and his wife, Mwansa, had 3 children, and the compound buzzed with the laughter of many kids. Mwansa gradually came to understand the kind of man Atumba was. She tried her best to inspire him to change, but no transformation ever came. Even after inheriting his father's farmland, Atumba made no effort to cultivate it. Instead, he sold part of the land to sustain his habit of buying beer and roasted meat from the marketplace. Meanwhile, Mwansa spent most of her time knitting outside, watching the children, all the way while dreaming of a peaceful home. As the years went by, some of Atumba's children were no longer small. His first son, Temani, had grown into a young man who spent most of his time assisting his mother at home, often wondering why his father was the way he was. One morning, Atumba made a shocking announcement to his wives and children. He was planning to marry 2 more wives, feeling that his household was incomplete. Atumba's wives were furious, especially Mwansa. "What kind of a man are you, Atumba?" she exclaimed emotionally. "When you married me, you promised to take care of me, yet you have failed to do so. You don't even consider our children," she continued, while Luono looked at Mwansa with pity and left without saying a word. Mwansa cried for so many days, but Atumba had already made his decision. He traveled to a nearby village and married 2 additional wives, filling his household with even more people. Atumba was elated and proud of himself. He strutted around the village, boastful, looking down upon men who had fewer wives. He believed this was his greatest achievement. However, Atumba had no idea that other villagers felt sorry for him, and others even laughed at him. Even though Atumba felt this way, his compound was gradually getting worse. His 2 new wives were just as lazy. They were not as hardworking as Luono and Mwansa. Just like Atumba, they never wanted to go to the farm or do any housework. Nandi, his youngest wife, spent most of her time outside, beautifying her face and maintaining her appearance. She loved to keep life lively and also telling stories to children, and often instigating conflicts, bragging about her beauty as well. She believed that going to the farm would make one old. On the other hand, his other wife, Miso, was never at home. She was always spreading gossip around the village and exposing her fellow wives. Later on, Miso had 2 children, while Nandi had 1, and the compound had even more people. One Sunday morning, as the sun rose over Chibalashi, its rays splashed against the cracked walls of Atumba's hut. Chaos reigned. Atumba, as usual, sat under a bamboo tree, scratching his stomach as the sound of quarrels echoed through the air. "Enough, Nandi!" Luono shouted, brandishing a broom, her patience at its end. "You can't sit here beautifying your face when the children need a meal." "But my face needs care," Nandi retorted, hands on her face, entirely ignoring the kitchen smoke. "Mwansa, help me out." Luono turned to their other wife, who sat knitting in the corner, utterly unbothered as she murmured to her favorite song. "Can't we talk it out calmly?" Mwansa proposed without lifting her eyes from her needle. "We've talked enough. It's time to act," Luono declared, swinging her broom dramatically. As the commotion erupted, Atumba rolled over. "Why can't we just have a peaceful morning?" he said, his stomach filled with gnats. Some of his children, caught in an argument over who got to eat the last piece of leftover cassava, added to the chaotic atmosphere. Maya and Nalu were at each other's throats. "You ate mine last time." "No, you stole mine." Maya running around with a plate of leftover cassava, barefoot, as Nalu and 2 other children chased her around. Atumba sighed. "Why can't you all behave?" he lamented, twirling his thumbs. But his opinions meant little in the storm of voices. Days turned into weeks, and the sun continued its relentless attack on the village. The wells dried up, and laughter turned to concern as the villagers realized they were in the grips of a deadly drought. Atumba sat outside, enjoying a moment of peace. But as his neighbors gathered, worry etched their brows. "I don't think the river will return soon," Mwelwa said. Another villager, "We need to do something." Atumba, overhearing, felt the tiniest prick of concern, but brushed it off. "Maybe it will rain soon," he replied, yawning, as he craved some cassava which was rare to find due to the drought. His wives were preoccupied with their own stress. Luono was trying to revive her wilting plants, while Mwansa knit what could only be described as a complicated tapestry, each knot screaming for attention. Nandi, however, took it upon herself to continue her beauty sessions, convinced that distraction was necessary. Miso moved from one place to another, gathering gossip about the current drought. One afternoon, the effects of the drought hit Atumba's home. Children began to cry from hunger, and the once lively chatter turned into hushed whispers of fear. Other villagers had kept spare crops to survive on for a few weeks, but Atumba's home was dry because they hadn't farmed anything. Atumba himself felt the effect. He barely sat on his bamboo tree anymore due to hunger. He spent most of his time visiting his friends one after the other, hoping they would offer him something to eat. "Atumba," Luono shouted, her voice piercing through the oppressive air. "Do something." "What can I do?" Atumba replied, waving a dismissive hand. "I'll just wait it out." "But waiting won't help." Mwansa, his second wife, stomped her foot, furious. "You are useless." Maya and Nalu, emboldened by their mother's frustration, exchanged hurtful glares. "Maybe Dad should marry another woman so someone can wipe the floor with him," Maya said. "Stop it." Atumba finally spoke up, rising to his feet, but his anger wasn't enough to drive them apart. The heat of the drought had ignited even greater tensions. As the days passed, the situation worsened. Atumba had also tried to ask his mother for help, but his mother was also in the same situation, and for the first time, she couldn't help him in any way. He could no longer hide the fact that his home had turned into a battlefield. His wives frequently clashed, and his children grew increasingly divided. One night, a heavy silence settled over Chiwalashi. Atumba awoke to the sound of the wind. He peeked out of his hut to find old friends in the village, gathered at the well, now nothing but an empty pit. In that moment, Atumba felt a stirring of responsibility. His wives fought over few resources, but perhaps his laziness had contributed to their clashes. The realization was hard to swallow, but Atumba understood he needed to act before it was too late. The following morning, Atumba summoned an assembly, his voice surprisingly firm. "We need to help each other," he stated, looking at the pained faces of his family and neighbors. "What do you mean?" Mwansa crossed her arms, still skeptical, but softened by Atumba's words. "We need to share our resources and work together," Atumba said, his words more earnest than ever. "Let's combine our efforts to dig more wells, to search for food together. I can lead." His family exchanged glances, the air thick with surprise. "You would do that?" asked his friend Coffee, the edge dropping from his voice. Atumba nodded, surprising himself. Yes, let's turn this chaos into unity. The villagers, ignited by Atumba's initiative, gathered to work together. As the days turned into weeks, they put together their resources. Atumba took the lead, organizing work shifts, prayer circles, and shared meals that reminded them of their togetherness. Though the drought was merciless, the strength of the community grew, and the fight within Atumba's household slowly stopped. His wives began to communicate better, and his children formed friendships previously lost in quarrels. One evening, as the sun set over a hopeful horizon, Atumba found himself surrounded by laughter instead of chaos. He realized then that while laziness had caused a turmoil, taking action had blossomed not just his home, but his heart. Atumba had finally learned the true worth of unity. Though the drought remained, together they faced it, turning chaos into harmony and teaching him that even the laziest heart could find purpose in love and family.